Ever wondered if someone could love you for who you truly are, not for your wealth? The Billionaire Beggar, a tale of love, lies, and redemption, will take you on an unforgettable journey of deception, love, and transformation. In the heart of the African savannah, far from the bustle of the cities and the glittering lights of high society, there lived a man named Kofi. His name alone commanded respect, for Kofi was not just any man. He was a billionaire. His wealth stretched far beyond the horizons, with riches that only the wealthiest could dream of. His sprawling compound, hidden deep within lush greenery, was surrounded by herds of cattle, fields that yielded crops all year round, and towering mansions filled with treasures from across the globe. Cars of every make and model adorned his garage, and his wealth was the talk of the continent. But despite all his riches, Kofi felt a deep, gnawing emptiness in his soul. He had everything a man could wish for: luxury, fame, and power. But there was one thing he could never find: true love. People revered him, but only for his wealth and influence. Women flocked to him, drawn to his grandeur and the life of opulence he could provide. But none of them loved him for who he truly was. His heart, though full of love to give, had never known genuine affection. Kofi realized that no matter how much money he spent, no matter how many extravagant gifts he gave, he could never find someone who truly cared for him as a person. They all cared for the luxury, the lifestyle, and the status that came with being his lover, but none saw the real Kofi. The more he thought about it, the more his heart sank. The deeper he delved into his relationships, the emptier he felt. The grand mansion he lived in seemed cold and lifeless, and the laughter of his guests, though constant, was hollow. His wealth, once a source of pride, now felt like a heavy burden. One fateful evening, as he sat by the shimmering waters of his private pool, Kofi made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would leave it all behind: the riches, the fame, the endless parties, and seek out true love, hidden beneath the cloak of anonymity. For once in his life, Kofi would test the world to see if love could exist without the shine of his fortune. "I will leave everything behind," he said to himself, his voice barely a whisper. "If someone loves me for who I am and not for my money, I will have found the true love I have been searching for." Kofi shared his decision with his parents, Chief Kwame and Ama, who were shocked and concerned by his plan. Chief Kwame was a renowned leader, a man whose words could sway nations, while Ama was a powerful businesswoman whose influence stretched far beyond the borders of their homeland. They had raised Kofi to be a man of strength and ambition, and the thought of him walking away from everything they had built seemed unfathomable. "Son, this is madness," his father said, his voice filled with genuine worry. "You cannot just disappear. What if someone discovers who you really are? What if you are harmed? People would be looking for you." His mother, though more pragmatic, was equally distressed. "You are the richest man in the country. Why would you throw all of this away? You have everything. What more do you need?" Kofi, however, was resolute. "I need to know if anyone can love me for who I am. If I am not my money, if I am just a man like everyone else, will anyone love me? That is what I must know. I will be careful, and I will go to a place where no one knows me." Reluctantly, his parents agreed, though their hearts were heavy with worry. Kofi packed a small bag, leaving behind his lavish lifestyle, his servants, and his family's fortune. He took only what he needed: tattered clothes, a simple backpack, and his determination. After weeks of travel, Kofi arrived at a small, humble village far from the city, where the air was thick with the scent of earth and the sound of the river's gentle flow. The village was nestled between thick groves of trees and hills that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. It was a place where people lived simply, worked the land, and embraced a life that was in stark contrast to the world Kofi had known. It was here, in this quiet, unassuming village, that Kofi would test his theory. He knew no one in this village. There were no businesses, No glittering markets, only humble homes and hard-working villagers. To ensure his anonymity, Kofi disguised himself. He dressed in worn, ragged clothes and covered his hair with a dusty cloth. He used a wheelchair to further convince others of his helplessness, something he had never needed in his life, but thought would complete his disguise. For days, Kofi sat at the corner of a quiet street in the village, his hands stretched out, silently begging for help. The sun beat down on him relentlessly and the flies swarmed, but he sat there, hoping for a connection. Day after day, people passed by, some throwing him a glance, others giving him a coin, but no one stopped to truly look at him. The pain of being invisible, of being a beggar, began to wear on him. It was a new experience for someone who had been revered by millions, but Kofi endured it, determined to find the love he sought. Most of the villagers ignored him, as they had their own struggles to deal with. But one day, as the sun dipped low in the sky, a young woman approached Kofi. She was unlike anyone he had seen in the city. Adama was her name, a kind and gentle soul with eyes that seemed to see right through him. She was of modest means, her clothes simple and worn, but there was a warmth in her presence that Kofi immediately felt. Adama had always been known for her kindness and generosity, even though she and her father, Roland, had very little. When Adama saw Kofi sitting there, alone and weak, her heart ached. She knelt beside him, her gaze soft but filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked in a gentle voice, her eyes meeting his with genuine empathy. Kofi, taken aback by her kindness, stammered, I'm just trying to get by." Without hesitation, Adama reached into her small purse and pulled out a few coins. "I don't have much," she said, placing them in his hand, "but I hope it helps." Kofi was moved by her selflessness. He had never received such kindness from anyone before. He had always been surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but Adama did not see him as a source of wealth. She saw him as a person in need. "Thank you," Kofi whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." Adama smiled softly. "Do you have a place to stay?" she asked. Kofi hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth either. "No," he said, looking down at the ground, feeling the weight of his deception. "Well, you can stay with us," Adama said without a second thought. "My father and I live in a small house, but we have room for you. You don't have to be alone out here." Kofi was stunned. He had expected nothing from the villagers except to be ignored or pitied, but here was a young woman offering him a roof over his head, despite her own humble circumstances. "Thank you," Kofi said, his voice shaking with gratitude. The humble home of Adama and her father Roland was a small, modest house made of wood and mud, yet it had a warmth that Kofi had never known. As he rolled through the entrance, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, a comfort that no mansion or palace had ever given him. The walls were decorated with simple handmade crafts, and the smell of home-cooked meals filled the air. Adama had no riches to offer him, but the love in her home was genuine and abundant. Kofi was shown to a small room, where a bed, though modest, was neatly made with fresh linens. He lay there staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had done. The guilt weighed on him heavily. He had told Adama and her father that he was a beggar, that he had no family or wealth. But the truth was far different. He had everything, wealth beyond measure, but none of it had brought him happiness. And now, lying in this humble room, surrounded by people who had shown him more kindness than he ever thought possible, he realized the depth of his deception. As he lay there, Adama's words echoed in his mind. "You can stay as long as you need." She had welcomed him with open arms, offering him food, shelter, and companionship without a second thought. And yet he was lying to her. He was pretending to be something he was not. The truth was that he was not some beggar on the streets. He was a billionaire who had left his world of luxury behind to seek love. That night, after a modest dinner of soup and bread, Adama sat beside him. Her eyes were filled with concern, and she asked, "Is everything okay? You seem sad sometimes." Kofi forced a smile, feeling the weight of his lie pressing down on him. "I'm just grateful," he said softly, "for all that you've done for me. I've been through a lot, and I'm just happy to be here with you." Adama nodded, but Kofi could see the doubt in her eyes. She was kind, but her instincts were sharp. He could tell she wanted to know more, to understand the real reason behind his sadness. But Kofi didn't have the courage to tell her the truth. Not yet. He wasn't ready to reveal who he truly was. The next morning, Kofi woke up early and sat outside, watching the sun rise over the village. He could hear the sounds of the birds and the rustling of leaves in the trees. It was peaceful here, a far cry from the constant noise and bustle of the city. He had never known such quiet contentment, and for the first time in years, he felt at ease. Yet, the guilt still gnawed at him. He was living a lie in the home of the kindest people he had ever met. Later that day, Roland, Adama's father, approached Kofi. The older man had been busy with his farm work, but he took time out of his day to speak with the guest in his home. "Kofi," Roland said, his voice warm but direct, "I've been meaning to ask you something. How did you end up in this condition? You don't look like someone who's always been poor." Kofi hesitated. He knew this question was coming, and he dreaded it. Roland wasn't foolish. He could tell that Kofi wasn't who he claimed to be, but Kofi couldn't bring himself to tell him the truth. Instead, he leaned back in his wheelchair, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "I wasn't always like this," Kofi said, his voice shaky. "I had an accident a few months ago. My car skidded off the road, and I was lucky to survive. My legs were injured, and I haven't been able to walk since. The doctors say I could walk again with surgery, but the procedure is too expensive for me to afford." Roland's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, placing a hand on Kofi's shoulder. "I can't imagine what you've been through, but you're in a safe place now. We'll help you however we can." Kofi nodded, but inside he felt a deep sense of shame. The truth was, he wasn't the poor, crippled beggar he was pretending to be. He was Kofi, the billionaire, hiding from his own wealth and seeking love in a place where no one knew him. He had chosen to live this lie in the hopes that someone, like Adama, would love him for who he was, not for his riches. But now, as he sat there with Roland, he realized that his deception was hurting the very people who had shown him kindness. That night, as Adama sat beside him, Kofi could no longer keep up the pretense. He had to tell her the truth. He couldn't live this lie any longer. "Adama," Kofi began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. What I told you about being a beggar, none of it's true. I'm not poor. I'm not some helpless man looking for charity. The truth is, I am Kofi, a billionaire. I have everything, money, power, influence, but none of it has ever brought me happiness. I came here to find someone who would love me for who I am, not for my wealth. But I didn't know how to tell you the truth." Adama's face was a mixture of shock and disbelief. She sat there in stunned silence, her hands trembling. You're a billionaire?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Kofi nodded, his heart sinking with guilt. "Yes, I have a mansion, cars, everything anyone could want, but none of it has ever made me happy. I wanted to see if someone would love me for who I really am, not for my money. And when I met you, I thought I had found that." Adama stood up, her eyes filled with hurt. "How could you lie to us? How could you deceive my father and me like this? We took you in, Kofi. We cared for you, treated you like family, and all along you were living a lie." Kofi's heart shattered. He had hoped that Adama would understand, but instead he saw the pain in her eyes. He had betrayed her trust, and now there was no way to take back what he had done. Roland, who had been standing at the door, overheard the conversation. He stepped into the room, his face stern and filled with anger. "Kofi," He said coldly, "You are no longer welcome here. You have lied to us, taken advantage of our hospitality, and now you expect us to just forgive you? No, leave our home. You have caused enough harm." Kofi stood up, his heart heavy with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to deceive you. But I had to know if anyone could love me for who I am, not for my wealth. I wanted to find something real." Adama turned away from him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not the person I thought you were." Kofi left their home that night, feeling the weight of his deception bear down on him. He had lost everything: the love he had been searching for, the trust of the people who had cared for him. In his quest to find real love, he had ruined everything. The days after Kofi's departure from Adama and Roland's home were some of the hardest he had ever faced. His heart felt as though it had been ripped from his chest, and he couldn't shake the weight of the guilt that pressed down on him. For years, he had searched for love, but it had always eluded him. And now, when he had finally found someone who cared for him, not for his wealth, but for who he was, it was too late. He had ruined everything with a single lie. Kofi wandered the village, his mind consumed with regret. The beauty of the savannah, the peaceful sound of the river, and the simple life of the villagers were all lost on him now. The quiet that had once brought him peace now only served as a reminder of his mistakes. He had come here seeking something real, but in doing so, he had destroyed the one real thing he had found. In the days that followed, Kofi spent his time reflecting on his actions. He thought about his family, his mansion, and the life he had left behind, but none of it brought him any comfort. The truth was clear to him now. True happiness did not come from wealth, nor did it come from power or influence. It came from love, trust, and the simple, beautiful moments of life that money could never buy. One evening, after days of wandering the village in solitude, Kofi made a decision. He had to make things right. He couldn't continue living with this guilt, knowing that he had caused Adama and her father so much pain. He had to go back to them, to apologize and beg for their forgiveness. Kofi made his way back to Adama's home, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the familiar small house, he saw Roland working in the garden. Adama was nowhere to be seen, but Kofi's presence was enough to stop Roland in his tracks. The older man turned slowly, his face hard with anger, but there was a flicker of something else, perhaps a trace of hope, that Kofi couldn't quite place. "Kofi," Roland said coldly, his voice filled with distrust. "What are you doing here? I told you to leave." Kofi swallowed, his throat dry. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling, "but I've come to ask for it anyway. I was wrong. I lied to you both, and I hurt you in a way I can never take back. I was a fool to think that my wealth would make a difference in finding real love. I don't want anything from you. I just want to make things right." Roland crossed his arms, studying Kofi with a skeptical gaze. "You can't just walk back into our lives after everything you've done. You betrayed us, Kofi. You betrayed my daughter. How can I trust that you're not just lying again?" Kofi looked down, ashamed. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it. I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want to prove that I'm not the man I showed you. I've learned my lesson the hard way, and I'll spend the rest of my life making amends for my mistakes." Roland was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on Kofi. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer now. "You've hurt my daughter more than you'll ever understand, but I can see that you regret what you've done. I don't know if she'll ever forgive you, but that's not for me to decide. She's the one who has to make that choice." Kofi nodded, feeling the weight of Roland's words settle deep in his heart. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll leave if she doesn't want to see me again, but I had to try." Roland nodded slowly. "Then go inside, she's there." Kofi's heart raced as he stepped inside the small home. The smell of fresh bread and cooking stew filled the air, and the warmth of the fire made the room feel comforting and familiar. Adama was sitting by the window, her back to him, staring out at the fading light. Kofi stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. "Adama?" he called softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. Adama turned slowly, her face a mixture of pain and disbelief. "Kofi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to apologize," Kofi said, his heart aching. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I was wrong. I lied to you, and I hurt you and your father. I didn't mean to deceive you. I was so afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons that I created this lie. But now I realize that the real love I was searching for was right here in front of me, and I destroyed it." Adama's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything at first. She stood up, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes. "You broke my heart, Kofi. I trusted you. I opened my home to you, treated you like family, and you lied to us. You lied to me." "I know," Kofi said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. But I understand if you can't forgive me. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to find someone who would love me for who I am, not for my wealth. And in doing so, I hurt the one person who truly cared about me." Adama stood in silence, her eyes searching his face for something, anything, that would reassure her. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Kofi. What you did was cruel. You made a mockery of my kindness, and I don't know if I can ever forget that." Kofi's heart sank, but he didn't give up. "I know, I understand, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I am not the man I showed you. I want to be the person you thought I was, the one who deserved your kindness. If you can't forgive me, I'll leave, but I had to try." Adama looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I need time," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'll think about it." Kofi nodded, his heart heavy. "Thank you," he whispered. Enjoying the story? Don't miss out on more epic tales. Hit that subscribe button and join our amazing community for African folklore and life-changing lessons. Stay connected, stay inspired. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss the magic.